Attorneys for the prosecution and defense in the murder trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin, charged in George Floyd's death, were presenting their closing arguments Monday, summarizing their respective evidence and witness testimony and trying to focus jurors on the most important elements. Prosecutor Steve Schleicher said Chauvin chose pride over policing last Memorial Day, calling Chauvin's knee on Floyd's neck unnecessary, gratuitous and disproportionate, and he did it on purpose. This was not an accident. He did not trip and fall and find himself on George Floyd's neck, Schleicher said, adding, "Believe your eyes. What you saw, you saw." Lead defense attorney Eric Nelson, meanwhile, urged jurors to take into account the totality of the circumstances. He said focusing on the 9 minutes and 29 seconds Chauvin's knee was on Floyd's neck ignores the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds. The prosecution rested its case last week after calling 38 witnesses and playing dozens of video clips over the course of 11 days. The defense rested Thursday after calling 7 witnesses over 2 days. Stay updated on the Derek Chauvin trial. Sign up for text messages of key updates. Follow USA Today Network reporters on Twitter, or subscribe to the Daily Briefing newsletter. Defense attorney Eric Nelson gives closing argument. The state has failed to meet its burden of proof. Chauvin took off his face mask as lead defense attorney Eric Nelson stood to give his closing argument to the jury. Nelson began by reminding jurors a conviction requires clear and convincing evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt. Start from a point of the presumption of innocence, he said. I submit to you the state has failed to meet its burden of proof beyond reasonable doubt. Nelson compared the elements needed to convict in a criminal case to the ingredients needed to bake chocolate chip cookies. If you're missing any single one ingredient, you can't make chocolate chip cookies, he said. In this image from video, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin listens as his defense attorney Eric Nelson gives closing arguments as Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill preside Monday, April 19, 2021. Nelson argued the prosecution did not consider the totality of the circumstances, as required by law. The proper analysis is to take those 9 minutes and 29 seconds and put it into the context of the totality of the circumstances. The proper analysis starts with what did the officers or what would a reasonable officer know at the time of dispatch, he said. Nelson said when Chauvin arrived on the scene that day, he saw active resistance from Floyd and, as a reasonable officer, felt it his duty to intervene. Nelson said Chauvin would have known that there were 2 rookies on the scene and that Floyd had white foam around his mouth, complicating the situation. Chauvin only moved to act. According to Nelson, when it was apparent that the younger, more inexperienced officers were unable to handle the situation, he played jurors parts of bodycam videos showing Floyd actively resisting. Nelson reminded jurors that officers called for paramedics within a minute of putting Floyd on the ground and that the officers decided not to use a hobble, a greater level of restraint. He reiterated prior arguments that the officers were threatened and intimidated by the crowd of bystanders. He also urged jurors to consider the difference between perspective and perception in the case. Nelson said the perspectives of various witnesses were different from those of Chauvin and the other officers. While everyone saw the same event, they each walked away with different perceptions. Nelson said, "There was no intent to use unlawful use of force," Nelson said, adding, "All of the evidence shows that Mr. Chauvin thought he was following his training. He was, in fact, following his training." Nelson said Floyd's death was tragic, but that Chauvin did not cause his death. He raised the possibility that Floyd died due to the drugs in his system and underlying heart issues. Nelson reminded jurors that the Hennepin County medical examiner, called by the prosecution, did not say Floyd's death was due to asphyxia, or low oxygen. Prosecutor Steve Schleicher gives closing argument. Chauvin's actions, a shocking abuse of police power. Prosecutor Steve Schleicher gave the closing argument for the state Monday morning, repeating 9 minutes and 29 seconds through his 1 hour and 45-minute remarks. George Floyd's final words on May 25, 2020, were, "Please. I can't breathe." He asked for help with his very last breath, Schleicher said. This was a call about a counterfeit $20 bill. All that was required was compassion.